I had been standing in front of the long mirror in my bedroom for almost 20 minutes, and I still couldn't decide whether the navy dress made me look too somber or whether the cream one made me look like I was trying too hard. It was my 50th wedding anniversary, or it would have been if my husband were still alive. He had passed 3 years earlier, and I had decided about 6 months ago that I was going to celebrate the day anyway, not because I wanted a party, because Walter would have wanted one. He used to tell me every single anniversary that the day we got married was the day his real life started. So I owed him a celebration, even if he wasn't there to clink glasses with me. I went with the cream dress. It had small pearl buttons down the back, and Walter had bought it for me on a trip to Charleston the year before he got sick. I figured wearing it was a way of having him there. My name is Winifred. I'm 71 years old. I live in a stone and shingle house on a stretch of land outside Asheville, North Carolina, that my husband and I bought back in 1979 when we had 2 small children and no business taking on a mortgage that size. We managed somehow. Walter built his architecture practice. I taught high school English for 34 years, and we paid that house off 2 months before our oldest started college. I tell you all of this because I want you to understand that everything I have, every stick of furniture and every acre of that property was earned with 2 pairs of hands, mine and his. We had 2 children, a son who lives in Portland now and calls me every Sunday at 4 o'clock without fail, and a daughter. I'm going to stop there for a moment because if I keep going at this pace, I'm going to lose my nerve. The party was being held at the house. About 40 people, old friends from church, neighbors who had watched our kids grow up, a few of Walter's surviving colleagues from his firm. My daughter and her husband had insisted on coming up from Charlotte to host it with me. That was their word, host. They'd been calling me almost daily for 2 months leading up to the date, asking about the caterer, the flowers, the music, whether I needed help with the seating arrangements. My daughter had even hired a woman to come in and clean the house top to bottom the week before. I thought it was sweet. I thought my children were finally turning back into the people I had raised. I should have known better. I'm 71 years old. I have been on this earth long enough to know that when something looks too generous, it usually is. The man who saved me that day was named Joaquin. He had been our groundskeeper for almost 11 years. He came to us originally as a young man who needed work, sent over by the priest at our old parish in town. And he had stayed because Walter took a shine to him and started paying him more than the going rate. After Walter died, Joaquin kept coming. He mowed the lawn, he kept the koi pond running, he climbed up on the roof every fall and cleaned out the gutters, because he knew I wouldn't ask anyone else. He brought me tomatoes from his own garden in August. His wife sent over tamales at Christmas. When my husband died, Joaquin sat in the back row of the church with his hat in his hands and cried as hard as anyone in our family. I want you to remember him, because Joaquin is the reason I didn't lose everything. The party was set to start at 3 in the afternoon. Around 1:30, I came downstairs in the cream dress to check on the caterer. The house was already humming. Florists in and out the side door, a man tuning a piano in the dining room, the smell of bread coming from the kitchen. My daughter and her husband had arrived the night before and were staying in the guest suite at the back of the house. I figured they were still upstairs. I was heading toward the kitchen when Joaquin came in through the mudroom. He was in his good shirt, the white one he wore to Mass, and he had stopped on his way around the side of the house to do one last check on the back terrace. He saw me, and his face changed. I'd known him long enough to read his face the way I used to read my students' essays. Something was wrong. He didn't say anything. He just walked toward me, took me by the elbow, and steered me back through the mudroom and into the small walk-in pantry just off the kitchen. It's a deep room, lined with shelves. There's a second door at the far end that opens onto the butler's pantry, which shares a wall with the back study. Walter used to call it the bourbon closet because he kept his good whiskey on the top shelf. Joaquin put his finger to his lips. Then he leaned close to my ear and whispered. Mrs. W. close to my ear and whispered. Mrs. W., stay here. Don't come out until I tell you. You need to hear this. I started to ask him what on earth he was talking about, but he shook his head, sharp, just once. He had never in 11 years told me to do anything. He took orders. He didn't give them. So I knew, in that moment, that whatever was happening was serious enough that he had decided to risk his job to make sure I knew about it. He left the pantry. I heard him close the door behind him, and then I heard voices. The back study is right on the other side of that wall. The wall is thick, plaster on lath, but the heating vent in the pantry runs straight through to the vent in the study. I had known this for 45 years because that was how I used to listen in on Walter telling our son about the birds and the bees. The voices came through that vent like they were sitting next to me. It was my daughter, and her husband, and one other man I didn't recognize at first. She's not going to know what hit her until it's already done, my daughter was saying. Her voice was low, but it had that edge. It gets when she's drinking, even though I knew she hadn't been drinking. That was just how she sounded when she was excited. Mom doesn't even check her own statements anymore. Dad used to do it. Now it just goes to her accountant, and she signs whatever he puts in front of her. The third voice spoke, a man older. Smooth. I'll need her in front of me to sign the new power of attorney. I can have it drafted by Friday. Once that's in place, the rest is just paperwork. How fast can we move on the house? My daughter's husband asked. The house is the slowest part, the man said. If she's still living in it, it complicates things. But once she signs the medical POA, you have grounds to have her evaluated. A diagnosis would speed everything up considerably. I want to tell you what that felt like, but I'm not sure I have the words. I was standing in my pantry in the dress my dead husband bought me on the day I was supposed to celebrate the 50 years we built a life together, listening to my own daughter and her husband plan with a stranger how they were going to have me declared incompetent so they could take everything Walter and I had ever made. I stopped breathing. Literally. I had to lean against the shelf and put my hand on my own chest to remember how. Dad set it up so the house and the trust go to both of us equally, my daughter said. There was an irritation in her voice now. If we could just clean up the trust language, that would be cleaner. My brother doesn't deserve half. He hasn't lifted a finger for either of them in years. That was a lie. My son had flown out to be with me 4 separate times the year Walter was dying. He had taken time off from his job. He had slept on the fold-out in the den. He had driven his father to chemotherapy in Charlotte twice a week for 2 months. My daughter had come for the funeral and left the next day because she said the kids had soccer. How much are we talking once it's all said and done? The husband asked. The lawyer, because that was what he was, I understood that now, named a figure. It was a large figure, larger than I had thought, frankly. Walter had been better at his work than I had ever fully appreciated. And the housekeeper, my daughter said. The groundskeeper? Mom's going to insist on keeping them on. We can't have those people in the house if we're going to be managing her affairs from a distance. You don't keep them, the lawyer said simply. First thing, before anything else, you don't want witnesses. I closed my eyes. I thought I might be sick on the floor of my own pantry. They were quiet for a minute. I could hear ice cubes. I realized my son-in-law was making himself a drink in my husband's bar cart. Walter's whiskey. The one he had been saving for his 50th. What about today? My daughter said. She's going to want me to give a toast. I should mention the trust and how generous she and Dad were. Plant the seed. So if anyone says anything later about her giving us the house, they'll remember she was already heading that way. Smart, the lawyer said. Very smart. And we get her to sign the medical POA next month when we come up for Thanksgiving, the husband added. She won't read it. She'll just sign. You're a terrible person, my daughter said to her husband, and she laughed. She actually laughed. I love you for it. I don't remember exactly what they said after that. I remember some logistics about a follow-up meeting at the lawyer's office in Charlotte. I remember the lawyer saying he had a forensic accountant who had helped him with 2 other estates. I remember my daughter saying, "What about the necklace? The one Grandma left her? Can I take it tonight if she's not looking?" I remember thinking, in the middle of all of that, very clearly, my daughter has wanted my mother's necklace since she was 16 years old. She asked me for it when I turned 60, and I told her she could have it when I was gone. And she has been waiting for me to be gone ever since. The conversation ended. I heard the study door open and close. I heard footsteps go up the back staircase, and then the house was quiet again, except for the caterer humming something on the other side of the pantry wall. I didn't move for a long time, maybe 10 minutes, maybe longer. I just stood there in the dark of that pantry and waited for the rage to do whatever the rage was going to do. When Joaquin opened the door, he had a glass of water in his hand. He gave it to me. He looked at my face. He didn't ask me anything. He just said, very quietly, "Mrs. W., what do you need me to do? I want to stop here and tell you something I think is important. When you are 71 years old and you have just learned that your only daughter is conspiring to steal everything you have, the worst thing you can do is react in front of her. Every fiber of my body wanted to march upstairs in that cream dress and slap her across her face. Every fiber. But I had been a high school teacher for 34 years. I had broken up fights. I had caught cheaters. I had sat across a desk from parents who lied to my face about their children. I knew, the way you only know after a lifetime of dealing with people, that the only way to win a thing like this is to never let them see that you know. I looked at Joaquin and I said, I need you to go about your day exactly as you would. I need you to tell no one. Not Maria, not the priest, not anyone. Can you do that? He nodded. And tomorrow morning, after they've gone back to Charlotte, I'm going to call you. I might need you to drive me into town. Si, Senora. Joaquin. I took his hand. His hand was rough and warm and it had calluses on it from 40 years of work. Thank you. He nodded once. His eyes were wet. He turned and went back outside. I drank the water. I washed my face in the powder room. I put on a fresh coat of lipstick. And then I went out to my anniversary party and I smiled at everyone, including my daughter, including her husband, including the lawyer, who turned out to be a man named Harlan, something who introduced himself to me as my son-in-law's old college friend who happened to be in town. I shook his hand. I told him I was so glad he could come. I gave a toast at 4 o'clock. I thanked everyone for coming. I told a story about Walter and the first house we ever rented together, the one with the broken window we couldn't afford to fix. I made the room laugh. I made the room cry. I did not look at my daughter once. She gave her toast. She said exactly what she had told the lawyer she would say. She said my mother and father were the most generous people she had ever known, and that their generosity was a model she hoped to carry into the next generation of our family. Several people clapped. My son-in-law beamed at her like a man who had just won something at the fair. I clapped too. Of course I did. The party ended around 9. My daughter and her husband stayed in the guest suite that night. I went to bed and I did not sleep, not even for 10 minutes. I lay in the dark and I made a list. The next morning, they left at 10. My daughter hugged me at the door and told me she loved me. I hugged her back and told her I loved her too. And the strange thing was, in that moment, I meant it. You don't stop loving your child because your child has decided to hurt you. You just stop trusting them. There is a difference. Anyone who has ever raised a difficult child knows this. The minute their car was down the drive, I called Joaquin and asked him to bring the truck around. I packed an overnight bag. I took with me 3 things: my mother's necklace, the original copy of Walter's will, and our trust documents, which I kept in a safe in his old study, and a yellow legal pad on which I had written down, word for word as best I could remember, everything I had heard in that pantry. I asked Joaquin to drive me into Asheville. I asked him to take me to a law firm I had never used before. Walter's lawyer for the past 30 years was a man named Bill Sanders, and Bill Sanders, God rest him, had passed away the previous spring. His practice had been taken over by his son, who was a perfectly fine attorney, but who also happened to play golf every Saturday with my son-in-law. I was not going to walk into that office. I had done some asking around quietly over the past few months after Walter's death, just because I wanted to make sure my own affairs were in order. There was a woman in town who came highly recommended. Her name was Imogen Ferrers. She was about 60 years old. She had been practicing estate law in Western North Carolina for more than 30 years, and she had a reputation for being absolutely impossible to push around. A friend of mine from church called her a Doberman in pearls. I sat in Imogen Ferris's office for 3 hours that day. I told her everything. I read her my notes from the legal pad. She listened. She did not interrupt me once. When I finished, she took off her reading glasses, set them on her desk, looked me in the eye, and said, "Mrs. W., I want to be clear with you. What you just described to me is a criminal conspiracy. The lawyer in that room has already committed an ethics violation simply by participating in that conversation. We are going to deal with him separately. But first, we are going to deal with your daughter and her husband." I had never in my life had a conversation like that. Over the next 4 weeks, Imogen Ferris and I rebuilt my entire estate from the ground up. The old trust, the one Walter and I had set up together, was revoked and replaced with a new one. The new trust had a different trustee, a corporate trustee that Imogen recommended, with very specific instructions that no family member could serve in any administrative capacity over my affairs without unanimous approval from a panel that included my doctor, my accountant, and a clergy member of my choosing. My medical power of attorney went to my son in Portland with a backup to a longtime friend from church who is a retired nurse. My financial power of attorney was structured so that no single person could ever access my accounts unilaterally. But the real work, the work that took the longest, was the will. My daughter had been wrong about one thing. The original will did not split everything 50-50. Walter and I had structured it that way originally, but 5 years before he died, after a particularly ugly incident in which my daughter had tried to pressure us into co-signing a loan for her husband's failed business, Walter had quietly amended the will to make my son the primary heir, with a smaller portion going to my daughter, contingent on her demonstrating ongoing and meaningful relationship with both of us in the final years of our lives. Walter had used those exact words, ongoing and meaningful relationship. She did not know that. Neither did her husband. They had assumed the old terms were still in place. The new will, the one I signed in Imogen Ferris's office on a cold Tuesday in late October, was different in 3 significant ways. First, my daughter's share was reduced to $1. The clause that Imogen drafted, which I have read many times since, states that this is not an oversight or an omission, but a deliberate decision made by the testator in full possession of her faculties, in response to specific and documented actions by the named heir that the testator considers to be a fundamental betrayal of the trust between parent and child. Second, my son received the majority of the estate, including the house in Asheville and the bulk of the financial assets. He did not know this. I did not tell him. I did not want him to know. Third, and this is the part I am proudest of, I created a trust in Joaquin's name. He and his family received a sum of money that will allow his children to go to college without taking on debt, and his wife will never have to clean another house for a living unless she wants to. I also wrote into the will that he is to be retained as caretaker of the property for as long as he wishes the position, and that whoever inherits the home after me is contractually obligated to honor that arrangement. I want to be clear about something. I did not do this for revenge. I did not do this because Joaquin saved me from being robbed. I did this because Joaquin and his family are the people who actually loved me. And love, in my experience, is what you do, not what you say at parties. I also added a clause about my mother's necklace. It went to my son's daughter, my only granddaughter, who is 7 years old and who once told me when I was babysitting her that I smelled like cookies. I have never been so flattered in my life. Thanksgiving came. My daughter and her husband drove up. They had brought a folder with them, just as they had said they would. The medical power of attorney. My son-in-law made a great show of helping me with the turkey. My daughter brought me flowers. After dinner, my son-in-law cleared his throat and said, "Mom, we wanted to talk to you about something. Some boring paperwork stuff, just to make things easier for everyone down the road." I sat at my own dining room table, in my own house, across from the 2 people who had stood in my husband's study 6 weeks earlier and planned my dispossession, and I looked them both in the eye and I said, "I think we should wait on that. I've actually been doing some work on my affairs with the new attorney, and she's asked me not to sign anything without running it through her first. I'll have her give you a call next week." The silence at that table was something I will remember for the rest of my life. My daughter said very carefully, "A new attorney? What happened to Bill's son?" "I decided to make a change," I said. "I wanted a woman this time." My son-in-law tried to smile and didn't quite manage it. "Of course. Whatever you want, Mom. We just want to make sure everything is, up to date." "Oh, it's all very much up to date," I said. I poured them more wine. I served pie. I asked about their dog. My daughter excused herself twice to make phone calls. They left the next morning 2 days earlier than they had planned. My daughter hugged me at the door, and I could feel, in the way her arms went around my back, that something had changed for her. She had felt me hug her back at the anniversary party, and it had felt the same as it always had. She had not noticed anything different in me, which is how she had assumed everything was fine. But this hug, this one, she could tell. My arms were not the arms of a woman who didn't know. 3 weeks later, the call came from my daughter. Crying, she had received a letter from Imogen Ferrers's office. The letter informed her that her mother had updated her estate plans, that her share of the estate had been substantially reduced, and that any attempt to challenge the new arrangement would trigger a no-contest clause that would eliminate even the nominal inheritance she still retained. I let her cry on the phone for a while. Then I said very quietly, "I heard you, sweetheart. On the day of my anniversary, I heard everything you said in your father's study. Joaquin put me in the pantry. I heard the lawyer. I heard your husband. I heard you laugh when he said he was a terrible person." She didn't say anything. I heard her breathing. "I don't want to talk to you for a while," I said. "I love you. I have loved you every single day since you were born, but I don't want to talk to you for a while. When I'm ready, I'll call." I hung up. The lawyer, the smooth one named Harlan, was reported to the state bar by Imogen Ferrers on my behalf. He was suspended pending investigation. I do not know what eventually happened to him, and I do not care. My son-in-law lost his job about 4 months after that, although I do not believe it was connected. He had been on thin ice at his firm for some time. My daughter went back to work as a paralegal, which is what she did before she got married. They sold the house in Charlotte and moved into a smaller one. I did not hear from her for almost a year. When she finally called last spring, she did not ask for money. She did not ask about the will. She asked if she could come up and see me, just for a weekend. She said she had been in therapy for 8 months. She said she did not expect me to forgive her. She said she just wanted to look me in the face and tell me she was sorry. I let her come. She drove up alone. She sat at my kitchen table and she cried for 2 hours. She did not make excuses. She did not blame her husband. She said she had wanted things she shouldn't have wanted, and she had let herself believe a story about me, about my mind, about my health, that wasn't true, because believing it made it easier to do what she was planning to do. She said she had been a coward and a thief, and she could not believe she had been those things to her own mother. I made her a cup of tea. I sat with her. I did not say very much. I am not in my old age in the business of letting people off easy. But I will tell you this. When she got up to leave the next morning, I walked her to the door and I hugged her and I told her I loved her. Because I do. I will always love her. She is my daughter. That does not change. What changes is what you give them access to. What changes is what you give them access to. What changes is what you put in your will. She is welcome in my home now. She comes up about once every 6 weeks. She helps me in the garden. She has gotten to know Joaquin properly this time, and she has apologized to him too, which I think was harder for her than apologizing to me. He accepted, the way he accepts everything, with that quiet nod of his. My son knows the broad outlines of what happened. He does not know all the details, and I do not plan to tell him. He is a kind man, and I do not want him to carry that weight. The trust is in place. The will is in place. The necklace is in a safe deposit box with my granddaughter's name on the paperwork. And every Saturday afternoon, when the weather is nice, Joaquin's wife comes by and we sit on the back terrace and drink coffee, and she tells me about her oldest son, who started his second year of college this fall on the trust I set up. He wants to be an engineer. He is going to be a good one. That is the story. That is what I have to tell you. I am 71 years old. I have been married, widowed, betrayed, and loved. The house is mine. The land is mine. The necklace will go to a little girl who thinks I smell like cookies. And if anyone ever tells you that you are too old, too tired, or too soft to defend what you built, you tell them about a woman in a cream dress with pearl buttons, standing in a pantry on her 50th wedding anniversary, listening to her own daughter through a heating vent, and quietly deciding what came next. You hear what you need to hear. You do what you need to do. And you remember, always, the people who put you in the pantry to keep you safe. I have thought about that day in the pantry more times than I can count, and the longer I sit with it, the more I understand that nothing about what happened was an accident. Every single thing that unfolded in my life that afternoon was the harvest of seeds someone had planted years before without anyone realizing they were planting them. My daughter did not become a person who could plot against her own mother in a single afternoon. She became that person slowly. Over decades, through 100 small choices that I either didn't see or pretended not to see. I gave her too much. I forgave too quickly. I let her believe, every time she wanted something, that the wanting was enough to justify the having. That was on me, partly. I planted that seed too when I was a younger woman who confused indulgence with love. The harvest was bitter, but the field was one I helped till. Joaquin, on the other hand, became the man who saved me through a different set of seeds entirely. Walter treated him with respect from the first day he walked onto our property. I sent his children Christmas cards. We paid him fairly. We asked about his family. None of it was strategy. None of it was investment. It was simply the way decent people behave toward other people, and yet when the moment came, it turned out to be the most important investment Walter and I ever made. Decency, it seems, is its own kind of insurance policy. You don't know you're paying premiums until the day the policy pays out. I have come to believe, in my old age, that there are 3 things a person has to protect if they want to make it to the other end of a life with anything worth having. The first is your moral compass, because once you lose that, you start mistaking what you want for what you deserve, and that is the exact place my daughter was standing when she walked into her father's study. The second is your mind. Stay sharp. Keep reading. Pay attention to your own bank statements. The day you stop paying attention is the day someone you love decides to start paying attention for you, and you may not like what they decide. The third is your nerve. Plenty of women my age would have walked out of that pantry, cried, and signed whatever paperwork their daughter put in front of them 3 weeks later because confrontation is hard and forgiveness is the easier coat to wear. I chose the harder coat. I am not sorry. You do not get to choose what your children become. You get to choose what you build, who you let close, and what you do on the day the truth shows up at your door wearing the face of someone you love. I chose to listen. I chose to act. I chose to keep loving my daughter without letting her near the keys to the house. And I will tell you from the other side of that choice that you can do both. You can love someone and refuse to be their fool. That is not bitterness. That is wisdom with the lights on.